Welcome to the new Eliot Hine Network. I'm your host, Mikhail Taylor. The first Eliot Hine Network is the first and only TV program that is run solely by middle school kids in the District of Columbia Public Schools. We are broadcasting simultaneously on Ustream, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Joining us as a special guest today is the Superintendent of the National Parks East, Ms. Tara Morrison. Let's check in with the Eliot Hine Network and our very special guest.
Welcome to Eliot Hine TV on Ustream and the District Knowledge Network.
I'm your host, Khalees.
I'm your host, Randy.
I'm your host, Samia.
And I'm your host, Rain.
Joining us as a guest on the show today is the Superintendent of the National Parks East, Ms. Tara Morrison.
Our show topic is Keep Your Eyes on the Prize.
Ms. Morrison, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Our first segment is Understanding National Park Superintendent Tara Morrison.
How does it feel to be elected the Superintendent of the National Parks East?
It's both exciting and challenging. National Capital Parks East includes a number of national park units in Maryland and DC, and so we have the opportunity to share with our local communities as well as national and international audiences places like Anacostia Park, the Frederick Douglass Home, Lincoln Park and Capitol Hill, the Oxon Hill Farm in Maryland, and Greenbelt Park in Maryland. So it's quite a variety of resources that we have available.
Okay. Who were some of your role models and why?
So I think I have two levels of role models. First is my own family, and I would say my parents, because two of the things that they instilled in us were to be kind to everyone and to work hard. And I think another important lesson that I learned from them that has inspired me to this day is that no one is better than you and you are no better than anyone else. And so that relates back to being kind and just treating people as you want to be treated. And then I would also say my aunt, who, because she was one of the first people in my immediate family who went to college. And so she set that path for us to know that college was something that we should aspire to.
You have dedicated your career to urban parks. Talk to us about the power of having goals in life.
Goals in life is something I think we all would say is important, and it's interesting that you tied that question to my work with urban parks, because I think one of my goals from very early was always being in a position where I could help other people. And one of the things that attracted me to working with the National Park Service is having an opportunity to connect local communities with our national parks, because we as the National Park Service are responsible for managing them, but they really belong to all of us. And sometimes people don't feel that the parks belong to them. So one of my goals was making sure that I could always be in a position where I'm helping people to make connections and to have access to opportunities that they might not know they have.
In your opinion, why is it important for young adults to embrace their education?
Education is something that no one can ever take away from you or us, and it's something that we all have an opportunity to have, and something that we shouldn't take lightly, because we all know there are people who came before us who didn't have access to education. And so for us to not always remember that and take full advantage of it, I think is something that we can't let happen. And so once you have that education, it empowers you to do whatever you want to do in life.
You've worked with parks and communities from Maine to West Virginia to discover, preserve, and share stories of the Underground Railroad. Can you give us one of your stories about the Underground Railroad?
One is, and I did work specifically Maine to Virginia, but one of the opportunities that I have, which was really enlightening, is we took a trip from Kentucky, and we did this by bus, so obviously not how people who would have traveled then, but we started in Kentucky and visited sites where people escaped from, traveled into Ohio, up through Michigan, and then into Canada. And through all of those sites that we visited, we not only learned about the people who had escaped and saw the actual places where they were enslaved or escaped to, but we also had an opportunity to connect with people who were descendant from them. And so to understand how important it was for those folks to keep their family history alive was something that was very touching and enlightening, and also made a deeper connection to history, because it's not just something that we're reading in books, but we got to actually visit the places and meet with people who were descendant from those individuals who were enslaved.
If you could select one word that describes your work ethic, what would it be and why?
I would have to say responsibility, and and the why is because for me, looking at work ethic and thinking about work ethic, it's your responsibility to yourself to do a good job, to come to whatever it is and bring all of your energy, all of your effort, and then responsibility to the team that you're working with, because most of us don't work solely as individuals, but we have to work as a part of a team. And so you're not only responsible to yourself, you're responsible to your classmates, your team, whether it's athletics or whatever, and then responsibility to the organization in which you're working for.
We are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
This broadcast is being brought to you by Eliot Hine TV on Ustream.
And the District Knowledge Network.
I'm your host, Jaquela. I'm your host, Sumaya.
I'm your host, Brianna.
I'm your host, Jamo.
Our show topic today is Keep Your Eyes on the Prize. Joining us as a guest on the show is the Superintendent of the National Parks East, Ms. Tara Morrison.
Our first segment was Understanding National Park Superintendent Tara Morrison.
Our second segment is Developing Partnerships for the National Park Service.
How did you strengthen and develop partnership for Rock Creek Park?
First, focusing on, so partnerships are relationships. And in any relationship, it's about building trust and getting to know one another. And in partnerships with the National Park Service, one of the things that we first focus on is understanding what our goals are and making sure that the partner and the park have mutual goals. So one of the things that I did along with the great team that we had there is we worked to establish good relationships, good trust with our partners, and then work toward what those mutual goals were. And we all recognize that our ultimate goal was to making sure that the parks were in the best condition that they could be, they were healthy, they had the programs and the resources that they needed. So continually working with our partners to strengthen the relationship was how we built better partnerships.
You manage national parks that honor heroes of American history, including Frederick Douglass, Mary McLeod Bethune, and Carter G. Woodson. How do you manage so many tasks simultaneously?
With a great team and great partners, to the earlier question. So, and I'll back up for a second to say, managing those tasks simultaneously is also feeling the spirit of those people that you just mentioned. And one of the things that I get to do every day when I walk into my office is see a portrait of each of those three individuals. So that's inspiring in and of itself. And then today we have great teams at the park who work collectively to make sure that we're taking care of those sites and sharing the history of those individuals. And we're fortunate to have partners that work with us to help us do that.
Talk to us about the profound African American history that is preserved in the parks.
So, you know, the National Park System, we have sites all over the country. And while we're fortunate to have sites of African American history here in Washington, D.C., in the greater D.C. area, we also have sites all across the country. And before I came to D.C., I was fortunate to work at the African Burial Ground in New York City. And so that site speaks to even African history before there was United States of America, looking at people who were enslaved in the 1600s, 1700s, and the place where they were buried. And so the National Park Service now has a role in telling that story. So you go back to the 1600s to our current time where we're preserving the history and helping to educate the public about people like Martin Luther King, or a more recent site in Maryland, Harriet Tubman, and the National Underground Railroad site on the eastern shore of Maryland. So all across the country, Midwest, Southeast, Northeast, we have a great expanse of African American history. And then also places that you wouldn't necessarily associate with African American history. So if you go to, you know, some of the battlefield sites or a place like Independence National Historical Park, you'll get to understand the connections to African American history that many of the sites have within the National Park System.
How are you working to make Anacostia Park a signature urban park?
So signature urban park, and in the National Park Service, we have now what we're calling the urban agenda. And one of our goals is to make sure, you know, all of the lands that we have in the National Park System were set aside and are managed by the National Park Service because they're important to our country, right? And so in our mission, we talk about preserving these places for this and future generations. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that people think they're important, right? Why do people care about national parks? Why is it important that we take care of them? So for a signature urban park, we have to work with our local communities, our neighbors who are in the parks all the time, and make sure that we're charting the course so it's something that we all think is important. And one of the things is, first, what does it mean to you to have a signature urban park? You want some place that's clean, someplace that's healthy, someplace that's safe, so that you can come in and do the things that you need to do. So we're charting that course with our staff, with our partners, and with our local community so that the park can be all that it can be.
In your opinion, what makes a great leader?
I think a couple of things. One is knowing that it's bigger than yourself, right? So as a leader, we know that we are working toward a greater cause, and whatever that greater cause may be, it's also not something that we do alone. So as a leader, you have a team. You're making sure that you're working with your team, you're building a vision and engaging people in that vision and process, and that you're also working to develop your team and looking out for their best interests. The other side of that, I think, is as leaders, you sometimes have to make hard decisions, and not being afraid to make those hard decisions even when they might not be popular. But if you're sticking to the vision and the ultimate goal, that's guiding your course and your path.
We are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
They even have good music.
This broadcast is being brought to you by Eliot Hine TV on Ustream.
And the District Knowledge Network.
I'm your host, Diana Mason.
I'm your host, Khalees Ross.
I'm your host, Aaliyah Mason.
And I'm your host, Tydrea Williams.
Our show topic today is keep your eyes on the prize.
Joining us as a guest on the show is the Superintendent of the National Park East, Miss Tara Mason.
Our first segment was Understanding National Parks Superintendent Tara Morrison.
Our second segment is developing partnership for the National Park Service.
Our third segment is the Lion of Anacostia. Talk to us about the bicentennial kickoff weekend, which has held on February 17th and the 18th at the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site in Anacostia.
So this past weekend, we did have the kickoff for the bicentennial, and it was an absolutely wonderful event. We started out on Saturday morning with a formal program and had a series of speakers who talked about Frederick Douglass's prominence and his legacy. And so the keynote speaker for that event was Kenneth Morris, who is a descendant of Frederick Douglass. And what really caught my attention in his presentation was, you know, Frederick Douglass left us a great legacy. And what are we doing about that today? How are we ensuring that all of the work that Frederick Douglass did during his time, we're taking lessons from that and making improvements into the United States and the rest of the world today? We were also fortunate to have with us Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. We had the first African-American director of the National Park Service with us, Bob Stanton, and a series of other speakers. And to highlight, also, every year we have an oratorical contest at the site, and we had the 3 winners, young people in elementary school, who delivered a Frederick Douglass speech. And so the power of Frederick Douglass's word is something that continues on to this day. And then for the rest of Saturday and Sunday, there were a series of programs both at the site and also at the Anacostia Arts Center that attracted young people, families, people who were interested in history, the scholarship, as well as programs for kids. So it was something for everyone. And we're calling it the kickoff because throughout the year, we're going to continue to have events that commemorate Frederick Douglass's life and legacy.
In your opinion, how did Frederick Douglass live his life as a global active and relevant leader?
So Frederick Douglass used the power of the word and the pen. And when we talk about, you know, oration, one of the great gifts that Frederick Douglass had is to orate and go out and speak, not only across the United States, but in Great Britain as well. So when we talk about global, and you think about at that time, for him, he didn't just get on a plane and go to Great Britain. He had to go to great lengths to get there and share his message of civil rights, equality, power for all. And so that's the, you know, revolutionary aspect and the global activism that he had. He also was able to travel to places like Egypt, France, Italy, Greece during his time. So whether it was as a personal travel, as his role as a diplomat, or in speaking engagements, he had the opportunity to carry this message and ultimately inform what happened in this country as it relates to slavery, voting rights, and equality for all.
How can parents or kids find out more information on your upcoming event?
So events and also programming, one of our goals for the bicentennial is to engage more young people in Frederick Douglass's life and legacy. So in working with the Frederick Douglass Family Initiative, we're launching an education program where we're developing materials for teachers to teach about Frederick Douglass in the classroom, as well as providing bus transportation to the site and providing students with a copy of Frederick Douglass's bibliography. But for that program and every other program that we're doing throughout the year, folks can go to go.nps.gov/Douglas200, and all of the information is there.
Do you have any final thoughts for the students at Eliot Hine?
Yes, I think probably the most important thing in the spirit of Frederick Douglass is understanding, and going back to one of the earlier questions about education, education is power. And if we think about Frederick Douglass, someone who was born into slavery, who took it upon himself to become educated and then to educate others, I think as students, taking full advantage of the opportunities that you have in school and knowing that there are no limits to what you can achieve based on what you take from your educational opportunities.
Superintendent Morrison, thank you for being our guest on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
This podcast is being brought to you by Pepco.
Make sure you check us out on Ustream,
Facebook,
YouTube,
Twitter.
and the District Knowledge Network.
Have a great day.